Shalom, shalom, peace and blessings. Now let's get straight into it. So today we're going to dive into Acts, the 26th chapter concerning Paul and Agrippa II. And what inspired me to do this is an email that I received from a brother. We were actually going into something else. We were going into, I believe it was the Christian, at least a Christian ideology around the strangers in the scriptures. We were going into another scripture, but he ended up bringing this up too. So in that context, the email read, "Thanks, brother. They meaning Christians also like to go to Acts 26:29, thinking that Paul wants Agrippa II to be like him. But Paul was using subtlety against him. But I don't think these so-called Christians understand that." And I agree with the brother here. So the subtlety that he was using is actually already in the scriptures for us. It's lined up. And we see Paul speaking to people a certain way and leveling with them a certain way. And that's all that was. It doesn't mean that Paul was talking to Agrippa II here from a standpoint of, now all nations are going to be saved, this is a part of that series, by the way. That's why another reason why I'm going into it. Like I mentioned in part one, it's taking a nation by storm, really. And I'm not sure what this new movement is, but it's always something going on. And a lot of times I'm not even aware of these things, but certain brothers that I talk to, they end up putting me on. I'm like, wow, I didn't know people was even saying that, but that's why I try to, state to myself to a certain standpoint. Now, look, don't take that the wrong way. I do talk to brothers and deal with brothers, not from that, just saying to a certain standpoint, just especially like on the internet, there's a lot of people saying a lot of different stuff, meaning there are a lot of Israelites with a lot of different doctrines going on and new stuff. That was never a thing. But either way, let's get into it. We have a lot to cover here because we're going to go up and get some context from Acts 20, around the 22nd chapter, all the way up into Acts chapter 26. We're going to see why Paul used the subtlety that he used. We're going to see examples of that. We're going to see how he was actually keeping the commandments. There is a commandment behind talking to the king because Agrippa II was the king of Judea at this time. By the way, when we hear salvation for all nations, we have to start defining what salvation is. Just because when Christ comes back, he's not going to literally destroy every person that's not an Israelite. That doesn't mean that is salvation. Salvation is for rulership. Okay. And that rulership only goes to one nation. Okay. That is obviously the Israelites, the nation of Israel. Okay. No, so let's go to Acts 26, and then we'll just start at verse 27. And as you see here, I should have mentioned this by now, but I have two versions of the Bible on the screen here. On the left, you have the King James version, and then also here on the right, we have the NLT, or the New Living Translation. The reason I did that is, and I'm going to do that, I think, on a couple of the other scriptures, is so that we can kind of see a little bit more plainly with this, this translation, at least of what it's saying, so we can get a better understanding. And don't be scared to go to the NLT or whatever translation. A lot of times on scriptures, I look at all translations, at least, the ones that are available to us, to kind of see, what the discernment is from the person that was, translating it. I primarily read in the King James Version Bible, but I will occasionally, especially depending on the scripture, I will look at the other translations, and don't be scared to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so let's take a look. Acts 26 and 27. King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. Or in the NLT, King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. Verse 28. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. So King Agrippa, which, by the way, is an Edomite, okay, which today we would call a so-called white man, a whitey, a white boy, a redneck. All right, so this is Agrippa, all right, or he was known as an Idumean, and if you don't know, that's just Greek for an Edomite. So yeah, he would be a so-called white man today, King Agrippa. All right, so just in case you didn't know that, but Agrippa interrupted him. This is the NLT. Do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly? It's kind of adding words, but we get the point. So why is someone that's not of the nation of Israel mentioning anything about being a Christian? And keep in mind, when you read the word Christian here, Christian is referring to the actual definition of a Christian that has been muddied and sullied in today's world. Christian today means you are an adherent of the denomination, or at least the religion, of Christianity, where at this time, this more meant of someone that actually followed Christ, meaning kept the statute, laws, and commandments and believed in the Messiah. That's what that meant at this time in the first century. Okay, because this was roughly around, I want to say around AD 53 or so. That's when Acts 26 is taking place. So in this first century, that's what Christian meant. But why is Agrippa saying this? Why is he mentioning anything about being persuaded to be a Christian if we know the scriptures of the Bible, the promises, the covenants, like we've already went over, is all for Israel? So why is he saying this? And why is Paul even dealing with him and asking him, does he believe in the prophets? We're going to find out, but let's get verse 29. And Paul said, I would to the Most High that not only thou, but also all that hear me this day were both almost and altogether such as I am, except these bonds. So in the NLT, verse 29 reads, Paul replied, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that both you and everyone here in this audience might become the same as I am, except for these chains. So is Paul saying, I want you guys to be Israelites. I want you to start keeping the laws, statutes, and commandments, and therefore there's salvation for all nations. These are the conclusions that people draw, and people love going to scriptures like this to try to make these correlations that don't actually exist. So let's get what's actually taking place here. But before we do that, we have to get a lot of context, because we don't want to just pull these verses that we read here and then make all types of conclusions. Though, that is those are illogical fallacies, which we'll talk about at the very end. So let's see what was actually going on here. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and then let's read verse 20. And we'll read it in both too as well. In the KJV, or the King James Version, and then also the NLT. So it says here, and unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. So this is one of those verses that it may help to look at the NLT or another translation similar to get a little bit better understanding, so you can read that and then come back to the KJV to see and decipher what it's saying. So let's see what the NLT said. Okay, so this is verse 20 in 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. So when I was with the Jews, the southern kingdom, I lived like a brother that was of the southern kingdom at that time, to bring the Jews to Christ so he could be on an even playing field with them, or he could relate to them. You see, when I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under that law. In this context, the quote unquote Jewish law, which is not a thing, but what they mean is the sacrificial law. Okay, because that's what we were keeping all the way up until the time that Yahushua or Christ came on the scene, right? So that's what it means here, the Jewish law. I too lived under that law, even though I am not subject to the law. And that's what he's referring to, not the entire law. He's not saying that he now can murder as he pleases. He can now commit idolatry as he pleases, commit adultery as he pleases, not the entire law, merely referring to the portion that is no longer in effect because of Christ. Okay. The Levitical priesthood, all the laws that come with that, including the sacrificial law. Okay. Even though I'm not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. So a lot of the Jews, which when you think about it this way, the Israelites at this time, they were keeping the sacrificial law, meaning anytime someone committed sins, they, you can read all the way from around the book of Exodus all the way into Deuteronomy to get the various laws of the various sacrificial laws. At this time, I mean, we had been doing that for thousands of years. So you just have to keep that in mind. After all of this time, you have someone coming on the scene saying that they are the Son of God and that you no longer have to do this. And that's been the tradition of our people for that long. And we've been fighting hard in these various captivities to uphold the law. Someone like Paul, they weren't having it. And that's why they had such a big problem with Yahushua or Christ too as well. But either way, even though I am not subject to the law, I did this so that I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. Really quickly, this is how I believe. You know what? Matter of fact, let me actually read and then I'll interject here. So verse 21 in the KJV, to them that are without law as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. And see, you see the way that this kind of reads? I mean, we know 2 Peter chapter 3:16, it says that for a reason, that Paul's epistles are hard to be understood. Same thing. Let's get the NLT. Let's see if we can make some more sense of this, just in case you didn't read that for what he meant. It reads, when I am with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law. All right, so when I am with the Israelites that were not in the original fold of the Southern Kingdom that have been keeping the laws for hundreds of years up until this time, when I was with the Gentiles, the Israelites that never made it back to the land after the various captivities, especially the Babylonian captivity, all right, or excuse me, the Assyrian, especially the Assyrian captivity, but also the Babylonian captivity. For those Israelites that were scattered, that did not keep the law or follow the law, I too live apart from that law so I can bring them to Christ. Most importantly, but I do not ignore the law of God. I obey the law of Christ. So without going off, he's still living like those people and trying to relate to them. And that's why Paul says so much about circumcision. Like in Acts, the 15th chapter, all right, in Galatians, the 5th chapter. I mean, that's why he spoke about these things, is because of this. And he's telling you clearly why he dealt with people a certain way and why he spoke about matters in a certain way. And he didn't focus on circumcision for those that hadn't been circumcised, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day if you are circumcised physically, if you are not circumcised spiritually. You understand? 22, to the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. In the NLT, when I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find, sorry, it does sound a little, a lot different here. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I try to find common ground. So this is the interjection I was referring to just a couple of minutes back. This is my way of teaching. This is my way of living. I do believe that if you're going to be as effective as possible, look, it all comes down to the Most High, whether a person's soul goes to him, meaning that he or she turns their life over to the Most High and understands who they are and follows the Most High's ways by keeping his statute, laws, and commandments. It's all up to the Most High. However, here in the flesh, I believe in finding common ground with someone. All right. And what do I mean by that? A lot of you brothers, man, y'all, when you get into the knowledge, man, you just, to me, like a lot of you guys go completely overboard. It just becomes your only personality. That's all you talk about. You change your garments completely. I'm not talking about wearing like really nice garments, like something that our forefathers would adore. I mean, like you don't even keep up your clothes no more because you like, forget it. Who cares? This is, worldly to wear this or that. So your garments looking rough now. You ain't maintaining your hair. Hey, if you're going through the Nazarite vows, obviously completely different. But if not, you're not maintaining yourself no more. You're not looking kept up. You're talking way different. Everybody you talk to, you just, man, Most High gonna kill you, nigga. You doing all that. You be doing so much. And what you're doing without you realizing is you alienating a lot of people that may, just in the flesh, may have an ear to hear at that time, but they don't want to be like you. They don't want to embrace this doctrine, and then they got to live all crazy. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of y'all, man, that's what a lot of y'all do. And hey, I feel like I done said something about camps like 3 straight videos. And like I said, somebody go unfollow or unsubscribe every time I mention it. But I feel like that is the energy of a lot of the camps. Not every single one, but from a lot of brothers that I see, they just don't know how to live regular lives anymore. And, if you want to be like Brother Paul, you will find common ground with people, and I'm not saying that if somebody's smoking weed, you smoke weed with them to find common ground, or if they, I don't know, being idolatrous, or if they, celebrating these so-called holidays like a Christmas or Thanksgiving or something, you go break bread with them at Thanksgiving. Yeah, this turkey good, man, but we ain't supposed to be doing this. I ain't saying all that. All right, I ain't saying all that. Because, as he said here in the previous verse, in verse 21, he says he does not ignore the law of the Most High. He obeys the law of Christ. So without sinning, you still want to relate to people to a certain standpoint. And that's just how I viewed it for a very long time. I don't know, maybe the whole time I've been in the knowledge since 2018, I really kind of live like this, even more now than at the very beginning, but especially now. You want people to be curious and, ask you questions first a lot of times. You don't have to just beat them down the head, with the scriptures at all times, right? And that makes them more curious, and that makes them, want to live like you, versus, they thinking that if they come into the knowledge, they're going to have to be forced to go on the streets and wear rags and just yell at people all day. Okay. So that's, at least that's the way that I view it. But hey, every brother, you have their own way to kind of go about it. But let's go back to the point at hand here, which is Acts, the 26th chapter. So what I'm getting at is that's exactly what Paul is saying here when he's talking to the Corinthians, because he did this with them too, by the way. That's exactly what he was doing. And we see various, and multiple examples of this. So let's go back to Acts chapter 21. Let's get an example of this, okay? So Acts chapter 21, the verse in question is at verse 26. So we're going to work our way up and get a few examples of this and make a little bit more sense of why Paul is speaking to Agrippa in the first place. Don't lose me yet. Don't lose me yet. We got to build a little context here. So Acts chapter 21:27. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him. So the Jews, his own people, and when I say own people, I mean of his own tribes, the Jews made up the Israelites of the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Paul is an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin. So a lot of his own fellow tribesmen, or at least of the southern kingdom of the same kingdom, are the ones that's laying hands on him and calling for his death, just like they did with Yahushua. And because again, he's preaching the same doctrine, and they just mad at it, man, because they don't want to get right. They want to do the traditions of man. They don't want to actually keep, the statute, laws, and commandments according to how they actually supposed to. All right, because it is, and I'm saying that because it is a commandment. Follow Christ. That is a commandment. That's in Deuteronomy, the 18th chapter, around with the 15th verse on through. So it is a commandment to follow Yahushua. But either way, let's keep going. Verse 28, crying out, men of Israel, help! This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple and have polluted this holy place. Really quickly, if you did not know about why they said the Greeks, they're not referring to the so-called white man. They're not referring to just all nations of people. Greeks does not equal white. Greeks does not equal Edomite. Greeks does not equal all nations, like people will make you out to believe. Okay. In Greece, matter of fact, the original people of Greece were the people of Japheth. Okay. The original people of Greece and the Japhites were so-called black people. Well, when I say so-called black, not our exact same stock, meaning they were people of color. Excuse me. Let me just say it like that. They were people of color. And there's plenty of examples that we can go into to prove that with ancient artifacts, but just don't take my word for it. Look it up yourself. All right. That's who the Japhetic people were. All right. I mean, had to be, because that's who the Shem was, and that's who Ham was, and they were brothers. So they all looked similar, and that means that's what Noah looked like. That's what Adam looked like, and that's where Christ come from. That's what he looked like. But anyways, Acts chapter 6. Let's go into this real quick. Acts chapter 6, verse 1. All in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. So you see here that Grecians and Hebrews are separated. You have the murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, as if they're different people. But let's look here really quickly in the Greek word that's used for Grecians. Let's take a look, because it may not be different people. A lot of y'all already know this. Some of y'all do, but some of y'all may be new. So I'm gonna just go into it anyways. So if you look at the outline of biblical usage for the Greek word used here for Grecians, or this Helleniste, okay, a Hellenist, one who imitates the manners and customs or the worship of the Greeks, or use the Greek tongue. But look at definition 2. Used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. So these are Israelites that were born in foreign lands and speaking Greek, because at this time, just how the main language of the world right now is English, okay, and the main country, meaning pretty much everything flows around America. Almost everybody that's not in America knows about America, but most people in America don't know about all of these other countries. Everybody is trying to get to America. America is, is pretty much since this is the main country of the rulership of the people, or excuse me, the people that are in rulership, the Edomites that are in rulership, since this is, mainly where a lot of them dwell, this is how the Most High has it set up. All right, so it would be pretty much the same way, like being Americanized or Westernized, just how you have in a lot of the Arab countries, you have, the Western ideologies like liberalism and so on and so forth being brought to their front door. Okay, so it's pretty much the same way as far as Hellenism would be in this time. Okay, So it's just a rough way. I'm trying is a lot kind of going to these topics and trying to touch on them lightly without spending 20, 30 minutes explaining this. So I'm just trying to give really rough, really rough definitions or really rough explanations, a broad view of it. But there's a lot more going on. But just really quickly, if we get 2 Maccabees chapter 6, verse 6 on down, let's read. It says here, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So when you read in the so-called New Testament and you see these Gentiles, not every single time the word Gentile is used, okay, not every single time, but most of the times that you see Gentiles being used, okay, or Greeks, is referring to Israelites. You got to get the context to know, but they're referring to Israelites. At this time of the Hasmoneans or the Maccabees, you see here during the Greek rulership or the Greek captivity that our people were under, it was unlawful, at least to that land, for you to keep the Sabbath days, the ancient feasts, or profess yourself to be a Jew at all. You had to call yourself a Greek. Okay. And that's why so many people were mad when these people came back into the fold, because they were not keeping the statute, laws, and commandments. And then the Most High, through his son, gave them an opportunity to come back into the fold. Okay. But they were our people. But as you see, again, they were not allowed to call themselves Jews. And this went on for pretty much hundreds of years. All right. Until we finally realized, when I say we, meaning the Northern Kingdom, realized who we were, and we came back to the fold. Okay. Yeah, I'm touching on a lot of topics here. I really want to go into them more, but for time's sake, we just can't. But I mean, I've done videos on all the things that I mentioned so far, pretty much. All right. So verse 7, and in the day of the king's birth, every month, they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. And when the feast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus, carrying ivy. That's why you have the Ivy League today, because an ivy, at least in this context, was one of the symbols for the quote unquote god Bacchus. Okay. And that's why you get a bachelor's degree, because it's after the whole school system is after the rites of the Bacchus. Okay. Like you have the master masons, you have a master's degree. You just keep climbing up the ladder of the rites and the passages of the god Bacchus. But anyway, that's just a small, if you didn't know that, just a small insert there. But either way, the main point is that, yes, you had Jews that called themselves Greeks, or really they pretty not just called themselves, they identified as Greeks. Just like today we have identify as a man, identify as a woman. They identified as Greeks, okay, wholeheartedly. All right, so that's what it meant here in verse 27, in verse 28 in Acts chapter 21. And further brought Greeks also into the temple. He was not bringing random people from random nations. Paul wasn't. He was preaching to his own people that had been out of the fold. Okay, this is very simple stuff. If you understand history, it's very simple. But if you're looking to push an agenda and cherry pick scriptures, then yeah, that's the only time this becomes a lot more complicated. It's very simple once you understand the history behind it. Okay, you cannot get past history. You can't change it. You can't ignore it. You have to deal with the history of the scriptures. You cannot just grab scriptures and then run with it, and just say whatever you want to say. It does not work like that. Okay, now let's go to Acts chapter 22. Matter of fact, let me go back to chapter 21. Make sure I wanted to get something else here. Yeah, let's get this. So Acts chapter 21 and verse 37. And as Paul was to be led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Verse 38. Art not thou that Egyptian, which before these days made us an uproar and led us out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? Verse 39, check this out. But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia. In the Greek, normally the C's are K's, or the sound of what we have as a K. But either way, a citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. So you see Paul identify as many different things in the scripture. So now he's going back to his hometown of Tarsus. We're going to see him call himself a Roman, a Jew. What else? I mean, whatever is needed to relate to the people that he's talking to, because Paul has a mission. And that's one of the points I've been trying to build up to. Paul has a mission here. He's being arrested unlawfully, immorally. He's being detained. He's being captured for no reason. All right. We know why spiritually, the people just don't want to hear the truth. But he has a mission. He has to still preach into the rest of the quote unquote Gentiles, meaning the Israelites of the other kingdom, of the northern kingdom. Right. He has a mission, but these people are trying to hold him back. So basically, he's using speech and saying things that he needs to say to avoid capital punishment, and so that he can get out of that thing and go do what he's supposed to do. Like, he has a mission from Christ here, man. It ain't nothing to play with. So that's what he's doing. So you see how he related with this man? When Paul was led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, may I speak unto thee? Who said, canst thou speak Greek? So now you're like, yo, can you speak Greek? Aren't you that Egyptian? By the way, you see that? Are you that Egyptian? The Egyptians look similar to the Israelites. We know what the ancient Egyptians look like. So, that lets you know what the Israelite man looked like. But either way, yes, he's using his hometown, which is something that you would do. Like, say, for example, you're at work and you're having small talk with someone, and they say, I graduated from this school, and you graduated from the same school. Aren't you going to bring it up? You're like, yeah, I graduated from so-and-so school too. Or maybe you know somebody that graduated from there. Your best friend. Oh, my best friend graduated from there. Or my wife, whatever. You know what I mean? That's how you relate to people, by bringing up those types of things. And that's what Paul was doing. And that's what we saw demonstrated in 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. Okay, so that's all that was going on with Acts 26. But again, we're going to get a few more examples of that. So let's get Acts chapter 22. And then we'll start at, matter of fact, let's go back 21 really quickly, because let's take a look at something here. Verse 40 in Acts chapter 21. And when he had given them license, Paul stood on the stairs and beckoned with the hand unto the people. So the audience here are Israelites, by the way. And that's going to change when we get closer down to the verse in question in Acts chapter 26. But for right now, the audience are other Israelites. Okay. Reading on. And when there was made a great silence, he spake unto them in the Hebrew tongue, saying, so you see now Paul is speaking Hebrew because he's talking to other Hebrews. You see, just like he mentioned, finding a common ground, like it said in the NLT, finding a common ground with everyone. So because he around Hebrews, he like, shoot, let me talk my native tongue. Okay, this is the next chapter, verse 1. Men, brethren, and fathers, hear ye my defense, which I make now unto you. Verse 2, and when they heard that he spake in the Hebrew tongue to them, they kept the more silence. And he said, see, that really got their attention, that Paul was speaking in Hebrew, because they knew that he was from Tarsus. They like, oh, okay, he Israelite for real. Like he know the Hebrew. You know what I'm saying? Verse 3, this is important to understand too. Verse 3, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel and taught according to the perfect manner of the law and of the fathers, and was zealous towards the Most High, as ye all are this day. So you see, now he's talking to the Israelites a certain way. He know they zealous towards the Most High. He know they about keeping the law. And so he said that. That's why he's bringing that up. And taught according to the perfect manner of the law. That also destroys anybody that thinks that Paul is bringing on a new doctrine in the so-called New Testament. There was no New Testament at the time that Paul was writing his epistles. There was no New Testament at the time of the gospel. All you had was a quote unquote Old Testament. All you had was the law. That's what Paul goes by. Paul didn't create a whole new doctrine. He didn't create, let's bring the gospel to all nations and all of that. Whatever was stated in the so-called Old Testament is the same now. All right. Christ is the same forever. The Most High is the same forever. All right. The scriptures tell us that. So as you see here, though, he's using this to come to a common ground with them. Them meaning the Jews, the Israelites of the southern kingdom, because he knows that this is one way to relate to them. He's speaking their language. That's another way to say it. He's speaking their language. And I mean that literally, but also metaphorically, he's speaking their language. He's relating to them, you see, to no avail, by the way, but either way, he tried. All right. Verse 4, and I persecuted this way unto the death, binding and delivering unto prisons both men and women. Let's keep going down. He mentioned how Yahushua spoke to him, and you can get more on that in Acts the 9th chapter. Okay. He mentioned Ananias. We keep going down. Okay, this is what I wanted to get to. So let's go down to, because again, it didn't work. It didn't work. So let's get verse 24. The chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. Verse 25. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? You see that? Again, speaking the language, a centurion is a Roman soldier. You see what he did? He said, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman? He's already called himself a Jew. He said he's from Tarsus, right? Now he's saying that he's a Roman. Why? Because he's speaking to a Roman guard, a Roman soldier, I should say. You see what I'm saying? So now he's relating with him. I'm from Rome too. I'm Roman. And brothers really should be doing the same thing. Like you got to use this for your advantage. I mean, if you on a date or something like that, you would do that too, right? Woman say, my dad is, I don't know, my dad is in the military. You served in the military. I bet you're going to bring it up, right? Oh, I'm a military man. Semper Fi or something, whatever. Whatever y'all be saying. Verse 26, when a centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. And you see, it worked out for him. So it was good that he brought this up. All right. So in the flesh, the Most High has given Paul the spiritual discernment to say and move about a certain way so that he can perform his holy duty. You see what I'm saying? So he can perform and fulfill prophecy. All right. So the Most High does extraordinary things in an ordinary fashion, meaning he does spiritual things sometimes in just in the physical world. So spiritually, what's happening here is that the Most High is protecting Paul from death. It's not his time yet. He still has different things that he has to accomplish on the earth. All right. But physically, what's happening here in the flesh is that Paul is using subtlety, just like the brother said, to accomplish the goals that he's looking to accomplish, which is not be killed. Right. Because If it was up to the Israelites, he'd have been put to death a while back now. Okay. So you see, that's all that's happening in Acts chapter 26. That's all that is. It's not any deeper than that. There's nothing said there about any salvation or anything else. Matter of fact, in Acts chapter 26, we're about to read that in a second, it's quite the opposite that's said. Okay. So I know going into Paul's different missionaries and different things like that is not the most exciting, but brothers should be looking for excitement anyways. Brothers be looking for just precepts here and there, just something to say to kind of knock somebody back. This precept, but this is all important too. And I'm skipping a lot of it, as far as like exactly what's happening here and everything leading up to it. But, brothers should have read Acts by now, at least if you've been in this walk for a minute. But either way, let's get verse 28. And the chief captain answered, with a great sum obtained, I this freedom. And Paul said, but I was freeborn. Okay. So, 29, let's get that. Then straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him. And the chief captain also was afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him. So you see, this worked out in his favor for mentioning this, that he was a Roman, to not only the chief captain, but also to the centurion. You see, because it was against their ways to persecute a Roman in that same fashion that the Israelites or the Jews, the southern kingdom, aka, was trying to, deal with Paul, because in their wicked eyes that they were actually following the law. They were executing him based on the fact that he was basically committing a blasphemy. You get it? But that wasn't the ways of the Romans, from a Roman to Roman. So, they didn't want to do it. Essentially, now let's take a look. Acts chapter 23. So next chapter over. Let's see. But when Paul perceived that the one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question. Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Now this man is a Pharisee. You see? And he's not lying. None of the things that he's mentioned. So I'm not saying that he's lying. The right word to use there is subtlety, or he's being subtle, right? He is being intelligent here. All right. I wouldn't say cunning. He's just, he's just doing things a certain way, and it's working out for him. But again, he's mentioning that he's a Pharisee, speaking the language to other Pharisees now, or he's speaking the language, but now he's claiming to be a Pharisee. He's claimed like 4 different things now. You see what I'm saying? So that really brings a lot of weight to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. All right. You see what I'm saying here? Now he's talking to the brethren. He's saying, yo, I'm a Pharisee. What does that mean? I'm a master of the law. I'm not doing anything against the law, y'all. This is a part of the law. I would know I'm a Pharisee. I'm a son of a Pharisee. So I come from the line of Pharisees. You get it? So that's all that was happening. I'm bringing in this evidence, man, because it's right there for us to see. Now let's get Acts, the 24th chapter. We almost there, and let's keep it going. Now let's go to verse 24. So Paul has now been delivered up to the actual Romans, meaning the Idumeans. Okay, so let's see here. Let's go verse 24 in Acts chapter 24. And after certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. Verse 25. And as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, Go thy way for this time. When I have a convenient season, I will call for thee. So it doesn't seem like I don't know. I can't say because it doesn't say exactly what Paul said here. It said that he reasoned concerning the faith in Christ with righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come. We know the judgment to come for the Edomites. So I don't know. It says Felix trembled. I can't make any deductions from this. I can't say that Paul told him about Malachi 1 and 4 or Isaiah chapter 34. I mean, the various scriptures that Obadiah, obviously Obadiah. I can't say that he said that or anything like that, but I will say that Felix trembled. Okay. And doesn't this remind you of a lot of interactions that you get today when you try to tell somebody about the scriptures? Go thy way for this time. Like, let's talk about this another time. When I have a convenient season for you, I will call for thee. I'll get back with you later. Israelite stuff sounds good, but my wife calling me. Let me get back with you about that, bro. That's pretty much how Felix was coming, right? So he also had another agenda. If you see verse 26, he hoped also that money should be given him of Paul, that he might loose him. Wherefore he sent for him the oftener and commune with him. Verse 27, but after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. So Paul was bound on house arrest for 2 years. And actually, during these 2 years, that's where we read about the book of Philippians and some other books. They call them the prison epistles, call them the prison epistles. So he wrote some of the books that's in the so-called New Testament during this 2 years that he was bound. But the point is again, Paul is dealing with Felix, which is not an Israelite. He's dealing with him a certain way now. You see, so he's been doing this the entire time. He's talking to people a certain way. He's being transparent about certain things here. He's, kind of saying things in a way that makes sense for him to get out of the situation. All right, because that's his whole goal. He's trying not to be put in prison because he has places to be. All right, there's prophecies for him. All right, let's get that real quick. Like in Acts chapter 9, verse 15. But the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. You see, this is Paul, or at this time Saul, but either way, he had a mission to bear the name of Yahushua before the Israelites of the northern kingdom, aka the Gentiles being mentioned here, even the kings. There were no Israelite kings at this point. So who is he talking about? The people that Paul is referring to. All right, to get the word to them. So, from a certain standpoint, get the word to them. So the word will be given into the children of Israel in whole. You see? So he had a mission that he had to fulfill that Yahushua gave him. And he was determined to do so. So he couldn't have nobody holding him back from that, man. So now Acts chapter 25, we almost there. Acts chapter 25 and 13. And after certain days, King Agrippa and Bernice came into Caesarea to salute Festus. And when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto the king, saying, There's a certain man left in bonds by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him. So we see, quote unquote, King Agrippa being mentioned here. Now he's finally on the scene. So we see how we got up to the point. Essentially, the Jews are the Israelites, aka the Jews from the southern kingdom, delivered up Paul to the so-called white man, just like we see a lot of times happen now, especially, our women. They claim to hate the so-called white man so much until it come time to call police on us, or go to the courthouses for the children, or take half in divorce. But either way, I'm only referring to the wicked, women, the 9.9% of all so-called black women. But anyway, no, I'm just playing now. But it does kind of sound like things that we see today. It does, but that's what they did. They delivered Paul to higher authority because they were trying to get him judged like literally according to Roman customs. All right, verse 26, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord. Wherefore I have brought him forth before you, and specially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination had, I might have someone to write. Now let's finally go back to Acts chapter 26. So Acts chapter 26, let's start at the top. Let's see something here. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, Thou art permitted to speak for thyself. Then Paul stretched forth the hand and answered for himself. I think myself happy, King Agrippa. Look, he's calling him king. Do you think Paul really accepts him as a king from a standpoint of, yeah, this is the king over me? Not only is he not an Israelite, but he comes from a wicked line of the Herodian line, which is a wicked line. The original Herod, he persecuted Israelites. He killed a lot of Israelites, man. So he don't respect him. But why is he calling him king? Because he literally is the king. And again, he's just keeping the commandments, which I'm gonna show you here shortly. But I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because because I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews, especially because I know thee to be an expert in all customs and questions which are among the Jews. Wherefore I beseech thee to hear me patiently. So when you had this line, the Herodians, they studied the law. So they knew about some of our customs from a standpoint of, he called him an expert here, which again is just Paul going about it a certain way. Not from the standpoint of a spiritual aspect, but like King Agrippa, he knew about the dietary law. He knew about the Sabbath. He knew about the feast days. He knew about when they were supposed to be kept. He knew the days of them. He knew exactly what we could eat, what we couldn't eat. He knew about the sacrificial law. He knew about the law. From a spiritual standpoint, no. He just knew about it. All right. It's kind of like, there's many examples you could bring, but at the times that we were in captivity, we had to keep the ways of the Babylonians. We had to keep the ways of the Assyrians. We had to keep the ways of the Greeks, as we just read in 2 Maccabees chapter 6. Now we keep in the ways of the Romans, but since this Roman is over us at this time, he had to learn our ways to see, what we did and what we didn't do. Or like in the Persian Mede Empire or the Persian Mede captivity, you saw how Cyrus pretty much, he understood the law too as well from a certain standpoint. Okay. And he was cool with the Israelites. And of course, this was commissioned from the Most High, by the way. And that's why the Most High called him his shepherd in Isaiah, the 44th chapter, in Isaiah chapter 45. But yeah, it was the same way with Cyrus. So this is nothing new. All right. This is nothing new. This is nothing to, create a whole new doctrine about, or to think now salvation is for all nations and all that. This is more of a political thing. Okay. If you ruled over a nation of people, and depending on how much freedom the people had, as you see, they had more freedom. They were in captivity, but it's kind of like us today, where it's like you're not literally physically a slave. You're just a slave spiritually, right? So they had a certain amount of freedom. You learn the people's ways, so you let them. Again, it depends on how you got it, but you let the people do what they're gonna do. All right, so that's pretty much all that's happening here. I could go into a lot more, but that's just the simplest way I could think to really put it. And if you know the history of the scriptures, as very plain upon tables. If you know the history of the scriptures, it's plain upon tables. So verse 4, my manner of life for my youth, which was at the first among mine own nation at Jerusalem, know all the Jews, which knew me from the beginning, if they would testify that after the most straightest sect of our religion, I lived a Pharisee. So he's saying the straightest, like the most strict sect of our people are the Pharisees, and I lived a Pharisee. Okay. And now I stand and am judged for the hope of the promise made of God into our fathers. Hold on. And now I stand and am judged for the hope of the promise. Who are the promises for? Made of God into our fathers. He's talking about the Jews. He's talking about the Israelites. That's who the promise is for. What is the promise? The promise of eternal life. That's what the promise is. Okay? That we will die and rise again. That's what the promise is. Okay? Verse 7. Unto which promise our 12 tribes. This is in the same chapter of the verse in question. What do we read here? Unto which promise our 12 tribes, instantly serving God day and night, hope to come. For which hope's sake, King Agrippa, I am accused of the Jews. The promise of our 12 tribes. Why did Paul not say the promise of all nations, of all men? Why did he not say that? Does that mean by itself? You need more context than that. So I'm not trying to say that because he didn't say that right here, that we can just close the Bible and that's the only verse we need. But when you understand context and how that works and the doctrine of the Bible, and you understand, what was stated to us way back in the law in Genesis through, that literal too, Genesis through Deuteronomy, the promise way back in Genesis 12, verse 3. All right. And all throughout, in the book of Deuteronomy, back in Genesis, back in the 35th chapter, the promise that was given to Jacob. Really, at that time, he was already known as Israel. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Paul already knows all of this. Again, he was a Pharisee. He understands the law, man. But the promise is only into our 12 tribes. When you read something that seems contrary, there's normally an explanation for it. It's, you just can't cherry pick a scripture, even if it uses the word save or something, like in First Timothy, the second chapter. Okay. It doesn't mean that all nations can seek salvation, because the promise is only for the 12 tribes. That's it. And you see that even though I've spent this whole time saying Paul had a certain amount of subtlety that he was, using for the people, he told Agrippa this straight up. Okay. He told him that straight up. Now let's go back to the verse in question. So now we got a lot more context, even though we didn't read everything, because this is one of those things where it's like you really need, if you really want to get down to it, you'd have to, you kind of have to really go into a lot. But let's go down. Let's go back to Acts chapter 26 down to 27 through 29. So King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. Why? Because Paul knew that Agrippa, being the king of Judea at this time, he had to understand the law. So do you believe what you read? I know you believe. So why are you trying to persecute me? Why are you trying to, don't let these people put me to death? You know what the scriptures say about this. Do you believe it? If you believe it, then don't let these folks put me to death. He's not saying this from a standpoint of he just went out. It wasn't and that's what people make it seem like he was willingly doing this. He was talking to him, pleading for his life right now. He didn't go to just King Agrippa. Let me talk to you real quick, man. Let me give you these scriptures, man. I want to tell you, man, you and everybody here, y'all can be saved, including Edomites, whoever, everyone can be saved. That's quite the opposite. This man is pleading for his life right now. You understand? That's why he's bringing up the scriptures. Okay. And he mentioned it. Do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian? Almost thou persuaded me to be a Christian. Okay. Again, Christian at this time is referring to a believer in Christ. He's been to him about his doctrine and why it is not against the law. And that's what he's trying to do is protect himself from saying, okay, from death, protecting himself from death. But what he's saying is Christ is not against the law. I know the law. I was a Pharisee. I came from the line of Pharisees. I know the law. Christ is not against the law. And King Agrippa, even though he is nowhere near spiritually discerned enough to be able to understand this, he's still like, I almost believe this. But he knows what the scriptures say about his people, so he can't commit. Like, it makes sense to him, but he also like, dang, I mean, I know what the scriptures say about my people. He probably knew. King Agrippa probably already knew that, man. That, Esau the Most High would have indignation for Esau forever. He probably already knows all this. That's what's happening here. Not this, like, people act like this is part of his missionary work. Like he went to King Agrippa and just, announced the scriptures to him and said, this is for you too. That's not what happened here. All right. And again, he's still going about it a certain way. Verse 29, which is really the verse in question, though. I'll read the NLT. Paul replied, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that both you and everyone here in this audience might become the same as I am, except for these chains. So he's trying to say, like, I'm in these chains. Y'all be like me, believe what I believe, and get me out of these chains, bro. Like, let me go, let me free. Like the way he's saying that like that, except these chains, he's trying to really emphasize that, except these bonds. Okay. But that's it. He's just being subtle in the way that he's mentioning Christ, in the way that he's mentioning what the Israelites are falsely accusing him, all right, of things that are not against the law. All right, Christ is not against the law. And I want y'all to believe that. Okay, again, remember, by the way, he is just keeping the law himself. Let's get that law. It's in Exodus, the 22nd chapter. Exodus 22 and 28. Thou shalt not revile the gods. If you don't know, gods right there means the judges. So the judges of Israel mainly. Thou shalt not revile the gods, nor curse the ruler of thy people. So we have many scriptures that talk about, praying for the kings, just like Paul said himself in 1 Timothy chapter 2, which is another scripture I've seen for people to claim that Paul is now saying that all nations can be saved, but that's not the case. But let's get 1 Timothy chapter 2. I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men. Verse 2, for kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. He's telling you why he's saying this right here. So that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. Because if you went to the kings or you went to all men and told them how you really felt and that they're going to be destroyed and not, Most High only chose Israel and everything else, which is the truth. But if you went to them, that doesn't sound like a peaceful way to live, right? If you're in captivity, it doesn't sound like a way to be quiet and peaceable in life, So that's why. And then when you're in captivity and you have kings over you, you want them to do the best they can do for the sake of your people. That's it, right? Not from the standpoint of you want them to keep the commandments and you want them to be in the kingdom. It doesn't go that deep, but just from the standpoint of, like, for example, we may not care. A lot of us, at least most of us, all of us, but hopefully most of us, we may not vote or anything for the president, but you still may pay attention to politics from a certain standpoint because it does affect you, right? So you want the government to do the best that they possibly can, even though you're not involved with politics, you know that it's all BS, but you looking out for the safety of you and your household, which you should, and your family, right? So that's what that is. That's what Paul is doing. And that's why he was preaching that. That's like in Romans, the 13th chapter, right? That's why he was preaching this, man. Not because of salvation. This is not a salvation thing. All right, let's get Romans chapter 13. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that are ordained of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. The Most High puts all kings into power. So if there's a king in power, he did it. Right? So that's what he's saying. Let your soul be subject to the higher powers. Okay? But he made the distinction there. There is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. So therefore, if you want to live a peaceable life, all right, and accomplish your goal of keeping the statute, laws, and commandments, this is how you keep yourself at peace. You see, Paul, the reason that we see a lot of times, it just appears that the quote unquote New Testament is written a little bit more indirectly or written a different way than a quote unquote Old Testament. It's not because he was on anything different. It's because a lot of times, the scriptures that we read about in the quote unquote Old Testament is we were in rulership. Okay. We were in rulership a lot of those times. And then even when we weren't, we were just going about it a certain way. All right. That was different and wasn't actually expedient for us to, be going about things a certain way. That was kind of indirect, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying there. But Paul, he was exclusively during his time, he's exclusively under rulership. So he was telling the people here at Rome, the Israelites at Rome in particular, but for all of us today, how to live our lives, okay, to remain peaceable. Okay, let's get Daniel chapter 4 and verse 17. This matter is by the decree of the watchers and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and set it up over it the basis of men. So the Most High puts all of these men in rulership, the different pharaohs, everybody that's a king, the so-called white man that's in rulership right now, he put them up to that. Okay. He giveth it to whomsoever he will, even the basis of men, which we know the so-called white man or the Edomites was also called the basis of men in the book of Job. But either way, not to go too far off into that, but because of that, he putting these different men into rulership. We have to know how to navigate through these different captivities, right? And that's pretty much all it is. Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. So another thing is, if you go against a king that the Most High has put into rulership for his specific dispensation of time, it's almost like you going against the Most High, right? Because he's the one that put him up. And when it's time for him to be cast down, then it's going to be time for him to be cast down. But anything before that, you going off. So, that's why it's not for our people to try to take a revolution by ourselves without the power of Christ. It's because, again, the certain bases of men have been put into power and rulership for a certain dispensation of time. And that's just to fulfill prophecy. Okay. But in that meantime, in between time, we have to know how to conduct ourselves so that we can be the most comfortable as we possibly can be. And we can't have the elect sealed if, we getting killed off and, getting sniped out because we going and we trying to be, like the Sakari or, the various, the various rebels that we had. But another thing, speaking of that, you can tell that It's just so divine. The way that the quote unquote New Testament was written, it's so divine. It's so obvious to me that it was written in this way, because if we did not have it written in a certain way on a physical level, it would never happen. But just from a certain standpoint, they would have destroyed the Bible. It wouldn't have been a thing, man. If the quote unquote New Testament, if it didn't read a certain way, if it read just like the quote unquote Old Testament, in order to keep us down, they would have destroyed it completely, man. The Most High set it up so beautifully that it would be revealed to us either way, but still it was put, hey, using subtlety to a certain degree. You get it? But that's pretty much it. I probably would just add a quick little addition to this. So this whole lesson won't be as long, and just finish up with a few of the last scriptures I had. And then I also said I would mention about logic and reasoning and how to come to conclusions with the scriptures using a logical basis. I did want to talk about that really quickly, but that's pretty much it. Lord willing, this was edifying. Until the next time, I bid everyone a mighty shalom.